Okay, hello Year 10. We are looking at the Emigrée today. We're going to go through it in the same way that we've done with other poems in the past when we've given you podcasts to listen to. We'll just talk through a few of our ideas, and then obviously if you've got anything to add once we've finished, then it's poetry, so every idea is relevant. This is Miss Leifert, by the way, and I'm here with Miss Earnshaw.
That's me.
That is you. Shall we delve straight in?
Yeah.
Okay. Should we talk about the title first?
Yes. I know that people, if they've done their first kind of lesson on this, will have looked up a little bit to do with the meaning of the title, won't they? But it does tell us a little bit more. Even just the fact that this is the female version of the word, so this is a girl or a woman.
Yeah, I think the fact that it's, other than it being the feminine version of the word and it being a woman, I think it's quite important that it is, other than that, quite vague, isn't it? It is the Emigrée. We don't know where this person's from or where this person has gone to. There's no specific details given about their specific kind of circumstance in terms of where they are and why they've ended up there. I think it is supposed to be quite a universal Emigrée.
Yeah, we just know it's somebody who is female who has had to leave their country of birth.
And then we can go into the poem knowing that, I suppose. And again, I suppose we open with, there was once a country, I left it as a child. And I think again here, it is a country. It's non-specific. So I think Rumens here is trying to make it applicable to lots of different people's situations, as outsiders or as people who are displaced or people who are forced out of their place of birth or their place of living in some way.
Yeah, and I suppose maybe that's part of the reason we get this sense of storytelling in this poem. Because I think actually even the title, it's like the title of a book or a film almost. This is the character, the Emigrée.
Yeah, and it's quite cinematic how it opens, isn't it?
Yeah.
This kind of scene setting that we get where we realise that we're being taken into this flashback. I left it as a child, but my memory of it is sunlight clear, and we kind of open on this kind of opening scene almost.
Yeah, very clear imagery in that opening. Bright, sunlight, clear. Very positive, I would say.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that it's sunlight clear, even though it's November and there's that kind of subversion of what we'd maybe expect from a winter month, and yet it is mildest and sunlight, and there's all the light imagery that is, like you said, very positive, very hopeful.
Yeah. Which we then get on the third line, don't we? This sense that this persona, this speaker, only has a positive view of this country because it says, "For it seems I never saw it in that November."
Yeah.
As though she's lacking in experience or knowledge of anything that's more negative or colder or darker. That may have come from that November, that particular November that seems to be important for some reason.
Yeah. I think then when we move on to the fourth line, we get that little hint that while she is presenting her city in the way that she views it in her memory, there are these little hints that she's maybe not the most reliable narrator or speaker. She says, which I am told comes to the mildest city. This idea that some of her views on this city, some of her attitudes have been influenced by other people. She's been told something. And I think that ties in with the first line where we're aware that she left it as a child. So these are memories. They're not current kind of impressions that we're getting.
No. Then in the I suppose we are working through it on a line by line basis, aren't we? But it does work that way in terms of either the storytelling or what's revealed to us in terms of impressions of this speaker and the country that she has this view of. Because then we get the sense that her impressions now could be shaped by news. So it says, "The worst news I receive of it cannot break my original view, the bright filled paperweight."
So I really like that metaphor.
Yeah, the sense that nothing can change the impression that she has formed, this view of the country she's held since childhood, presumably.
Yeah, and I think the using that image, that metaphor of the paperweight, makes the way in which she remembers it quite deliberate. She's holding that in her mind. She wants it to be weighed down. She's not willing to let her view of it change.
Yeah.
And then we get the ending lines of that first stanza. It may be at war, it may be sick with tyrants, but I am branded by an impression of sunlight. And I think this is the first time that we get that very clear war imagery, where we get the sense of well, we're told it's at war, but the idea that there's tyrants, there's been some kind of invasion of the city that she's from. But despite this kind of troubled past that the city presumably has, she's branded by an impression of sunlight. So that kind of light imagery, that kind of positivity stays with her.
Yes.
I don't know if you'd say anything about the word branded.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. I suppose it fits with paperweight, the paperweight metaphor we've already discussed about things being held in place. But branded here, it's even more permanent than a paperweight. The impression that that's been put on her, that's been therefore something she holds of this city, of this place, is permanent. And I don't know about you, but I can't escape the thought or the image, I suppose, when I see or hear the word branded, of something very deliberate and quite traumatic, really.
Yeah, it's quite a painful image, isn't it? If we think
Yeah,
about what is usually branded, it's kind of animals for slaughter, isn't it? And
with
the
a
kind of the hot
searing,
poker, and
yeah,
yeah.
searing hot poker.
So I think that is a very interesting word choice that we've got there. This idea that, the way in which she remembers it, while it's positive, it's maybe been quite painful for her to keep that as her memory of it in some way.
And it's perhaps been forced upon her by
Yeah.
others.
So moving on to the second stanza, we get the first section of it. The white streets of that city, the graceful slopes glow even clearer as time rolls its tanks and frontiers rise between us close like waves. Which again, we've got very clear imagery here, haven't we? We've got the colour imagery of the white streets, perhaps connoting kind of innocence and purity, tying into that kind of the sunlight that we had in the first stanza.
Yeah, and I suppose that fits with it glowing even clearer as time goes on. It gets even brighter and more innocent in her mind.
Yeah, and that's kind of juxtaposed with the
Yeah.
tanks and the frontiers, this kind of war imagery that is kind of permeating throughout.
Yeah, by this point we've clearly got, as you say, imagery, but maybe even a semantic field relating to like conflict, I suppose,
Yeah,
at its most simple. So far we've had war, tyrants, tanks, and frontiers as well. This sense of
yeah.
division.
And this barrier that's created by it. And I think we could see this very much as a physical barrier, the frontiers rising up and that kind of inability to physically return to the city. But I think it could be a more kind of psychological or a more metaphorical barrier as well, couldn't it? This idea that she can't return to this place in her mind, even because the way in which she remembers it isn't there anymore.
Yeah, definitely.
Um,
Yeah.
the next section, I think people sometimes struggle with a little bit because I think it's quite unusual, isn't it? So that child vocabulary I carried here like a hollow doll opens and spills a grammar. Soon I shall have every coloured molecule of it. It may now be a lie, banned by the state, but I can't get it off my tongue. It tastes of sunlight.
Now, there's lots to say about this. There's lots to kind of get our teeth stuck into, but the hollow doll thing and things spilling out, implying to me things have previously been in her kind of doll's head, almost an empty head. It very much reminds me of Kamikaze.
Yeah.
With the head filled with powerful incantations.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
This kind of
So
idea that she's been fed certain ideas,
Yeah.
and that kind
And
of,
she's brought it with her here to this new place. That child's
yeah.
vocabulary I carried here, almost repeating things in an innocent way.
And I suppose the fact that it's her child's vocabulary leaves her very kind of open to that manipulation, perhaps, or she's certainly very vulnerable, isn't she, when she's either remembering the city or leaving the city.
Yeah.
And I
But
think,
I think obviously it could be other, there could be other meaning to it. It's just
yeah, I've had
that, to me, that
people,
image of the hollow doll's head is what comes to me when I read that.
yeah, I've had students interpret the child's vocabulary I carried here, opens spills of grammar, as her perhaps having a different language from where she's from, and her having to obviously adapt when she moves elsewhere, but the fact that it's still there in her hollow doll like mind. But every now and again it kind of spills over in the way that I think people who maybe speak English as a second language sometimes in moments of heightened emotion might slip into their first language. I know my dad's German, and certainly when he's angry, he will kind of mutter to himself in German, and sounds very threatening and unfriendly. But it's this kind of idea that in those heightened moments, you perhaps are more comfortable in the language that you learned first, maybe.
Yeah, definitely.
And I suppose that ties into the fact that she's talking about it may now be a lie banned by the state. So I suppose it is open for interpretation, but I always view it as this vision of the city, what she thinks of the city is now banned by the state because it's under some kind of different control. So maybe the idea that she wants to talk about it in her memory as it was, but
Yeah.
can't anymore.
Yeah, she holds a view that's not sanctioned by
Yeah,
the state.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think we then, in that last line, it tastes of sunlight. We obviously get that kind of that chorus, almost that coda that we come back to at the end of each stanza. Sunlight ends it, which I think is always a nice thing to analyze or a nice thing to mention when you're writing about the Emigrée, because it's kind of structural, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's either that she always comes back to this positive childlike view of the place, or she wishes for a return to, I suppose, a sense of freedom that
Yeah.
she associates with this light.
Yeah, and I suppose, do you think it's significant that in this second stanza, obviously in the first one, there's that enjambment between the last two lines of the stanza. It may be at war, it may be sick with times, but I am branded by an impression of sunlight. It's much more fluent.
Yeah.
Whereas in this one, the last two lines are quite kind of broken with the caesura. It may now be a lie, banned by the state, but I can't get it off my tongue. Then we've got that full stop. It tastes of sunlight. It's this kind of emphatic line, I suppose, in that it emphasizes that, you know, even though people might reject her opinion, it is still there and it's still kind of very clear to her.
Yeah, it's almost as if she's trying to claim um, this view of the country and the impact it has on her identity, despite these sanctions, these state-controlled sanctions and things being banned.
Yeah.
She
And I
kind
think,
of
go on, sorry.
goes past those restrictions and those things like laws or rules banning things in the way that
Yeah,
it goes past the caesura.
yeah, I like that. And I suppose, I think it does, the end of that second stanza kind of take us into it. And I always view the final stanza as quite chaotic. It's quite busy, and there's a lot of movement in it, I think. And I think that kind of frustration that we might interpret at the end of the second stanza leads up to this, maybe. So she says, I have no passport, there's no way back at all, but my city comes to me in its own white plane. It lies down in front of me, docile as paper. I comb its hair and love its shining eyes. My city takes me dancing through the city of walls. They accuse me of absence. They circle me. They accuse me of being dark in their free city. My city hides behind me. They mutter death, and my shadow falls as evidence of sunlight.
So we get the city itself coming to life here, don't we?
Yeah, it's personified, isn't
Yeah.
it?
In a very significant way, in the sense that this stanza begins with, as you say, a very emphatic statement that there is physically no way back for the persona in this poem.
Yeah.
She cannot return. She has no passport. There is no opportunity to return to this city she came from as a child.
And yet this city comes to her in some way in its own white plane, that colour imagery coming back. I think it's interesting that she's quite possessive over it. She calls it my city, giving her some kind of ownership over this version of it.
Yeah, it's almost like a domesticated animal to me.
Yeah.
It's like a pet.
That comes in that third line of the final stanza. It lies down in front of me, docile as paper. I think the word docile is it. You do kind of describe dogs and pets as docile, don't you? And
if they are obedient and if they do what you want them to do, if they follow commands. So it's almost it submits to her view of it.
Yeah. And I suppose she cares for it in that way. She talks about combing its hair and loves its shining eyes. And I think all of that is very, I don't know what you'd call pet-like imagery. I suppose it's animalistic, but it's not animalistic in the way that it's something wild and untamed. No. It's very domesticated.
Yeah.
And then it kind of shifts, I think, in the middle of this stanza. My city takes me dancing through the city of walls. So she's looking after the city, and yet then the city kind of is doing something to her. So there is that kind of, I don't know, maybe a slight equality to the relationship. She looks after the city, but the city also does things for her.
And allows her to explore the city, I suppose, at least within her mind, because we know she's not physically.
And I think that image of dancing is this kind of joyous and quite free image that we get. So I think there is that sense of freedom that she gets through her memories of the city.
And I think perhaps because this memory that's been nurtured throughout all of the poem so far is perhaps where this speaker last felt free, when she was physically there.
Yeah, and I think that comes through in this next bit. So they accuse me of absence, they circle me, they accuse me of being dark in their free city. Now, I think, again, it's quite ambiguous, these lines. I think you could interpret they as being people in her current place, the place that she's had to move to, and this idea that there she's kind of the other, the sense of them and you, and the quite threatening behaviour that she's kind of exposed to, maybe.
Treated as different.
Yeah, and I think it is interesting that they accuse me of being dark in their free city. I think you could interpret that as having those kind of undercurrents of racism or prejudice in some way based on how she looks. I think
it could also be that they are the people who are still in this city of her birth.
Yes, the tyrants that have taken over. And then we've got. No, go on.
By this point, there's very much a sense of not belonging fully to either place, only belonging to this place that now exists in her mind.
Yes.
The memory of her home.
Definitely. And I think you get that from my city hides behind me, this kind of protection that she has over it, because it is the only place that she feels free and happy and has that sense of sunlight, because she is ultimately this displaced person, isn't she?
Yeah, and I suppose it's behind her. That word choice is important because it's part of her past.
Yes, definitely. And then the final lines, they mutter death and my shadow falls as evidence of sunlight.
More ambiguity.
Yeah, again, very ambiguous, very kind of uncertain, or there's lots of interpretations of it. I think it's an interesting mix of shadow and sunlight. You've got the kind of juxtaposing images there, haven't you? And
yeah, I think whatever you take from it, it's got to come from the juxtaposition of the shadow and the sunlight.
Yeah, and maybe to look at it kind of in an emotional way, is it that the shadow representing kind of pain or suffering in some way is only seen in contrast to moments of joy? So it's because of those moments of great joy that she's had in her city that believing it is so painful, perhaps.
Yeah. I don't know if you've heard this a lot at the moment, but the famous kind of saying, if you want the rainbows, you've got to put up with the rain. So
Yeah,
it's like something good can only come from something bad.
yeah, I think so. I think you could look at it like that. Um, I think the fact that she wants evidence of the sunlight is interesting as well. It's almost like she wants to prove that her vision and her memory of the city is the real one, or is true in some way. And I wonder whether that comes from those that are accusing her of dark absence and circling her. This kind of, she wants to justify her memories of this place,
Yeah,
maybe.
her view of the city. I think also there's a sense that the shadow is proof of her as a person. So we've discussed this idea that she kind of belongs to neither place. She has no clear identity as belonging to the country she left or the country she's come to.
Mm.
But I suppose in this final line we get the sense that it's her shadow that falls. Her shadow is visible and therefore she exists. She is a person, despite
Yeah,
the fact she's not really been treated as such.
yeah. So kind of placing herself somewhere, even though she might not feel she belongs there.
Yeah.
I was just thinking as well, as you read that line, the word falls
Mm,
kind of became more important. And is there that sense of sacrifice as well? She sacrificed something um, for her city in some way, maybe.
yeah.
Um, I do like this poem because I think there's a lot you can take from it and you can use it in a lot of different ways. I think it works well as a comparison to Kamikaze, in
Mm,
that it's so heavily based in memory, and you can compare those maybe somewhat unreliable narrators or speakers that we get in these poems, and how they view things from the past and whether that is reality. I think looking at that is quite interesting. The power of memory, maybe, as a
yeah. Yeah. And I suppose the impressions or the importance of place
yeah,
to these narrators and speakers.
definitely. I think a sense of identity comes through as well. So checking out my history would work as a comparison for kind of trying to place yourself somewhere where you might not feel like you belong. Um, and when we eventually do poems like Tissue, they make quite nice comparisons as well. So there's
Yeah.
lots, and obviously there
Well,
is.
even just based on this discussion we've had today, I don't think I've considered this in the past, but I'm now thinking it would work very well as a comparison poem for London.
Yeah,
The
the
city
power
kind
of
of being
place.
filled with suffering,
Mm,
people exerting control over a place.
definitely.
Mm.
Um, so lots that you can say about the Emigrée. Obviously, there's tons of things that we might not have mentioned. So if anything appeared to you, obviously, like we said before, poetry is very much open for your own personal interpretation. So you might have noticed certain words or certain techniques that are being used that we might not have drawn upon. So do feel free to put your own stamp on it and your own annotations onto it as well. Um, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, Miss Earnshaw.
No, I think well, I agree with all of that.
Yeah. Well, happy poetry. I'll just stop sharing my screen. And if you've got any questions, then obviously just get in contact with one of us and we'll speak to you soon.